The smell hits you first when you enter a nursing home. Disinfectant trying desperately to mask the underlying sense of medication, cafeteria food, and human decline. I never thought I'd end up in one, especially not at 72, with a perfectly sound mind and body. But there I was, standing in the doorway of room 237 at Pine Grove Estates, staring at the twin bed that was now supposed to be home. My son Daniel smiled as he set down my single suitcase. "It's just temporary, Mom," he assured me, the same line he'd been repeating for weeks. "Just until you're steady on your feet again." That minor fall in my garden, a simple stumble that resulted in nothing more than a bruised knee, had somehow become the reason my house was sold, my possessions dispersed, and my independence stripped away. I nodded silently, not trusting my voice. What could I say? That I suspected my son and his wife had orchestrated this entire situation? That I'd noticed the missing bank statements, the hushed phone calls, the convenient memory lapses they kept insisting I had? As they prepared to leave, Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, handed me a pill organizer. "The staff will remind you, but just in case," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After quick, perfunctory hugs, they were gone, promising to visit, soon with my grandchildren. I stood motionless in that sterile room, my fingernails digging into my palms to keep from screaming. They thought they'd won. They thought I was finished, just another confused old woman tucked away and forgotten. What they didn't realize was that I still held the keys to their comfortable life in Lakeside Estates. Quite literally. Because, while they were busy selling my home and emptying my accounts, they'd forgotten one critical detail. I owned their mortgage, and I was about to foreclose. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, you make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Martha Reynolds. For 35 years, I worked my way up from teller to executive at First Oregon Community Bank in Portland. I understand money, how it works, how it grows, and most importantly, how people try to take it from you. That knowledge served me well during my career, but I never imagined I'd need to use it against my own son. The first night at Pine Grove Estates stretched endlessly. The bed was too firm, the pillow too soft, and the fluorescent light from the hallway seeped through the thin curtains no matter how tightly I pulled them. Unfamiliar sounds jarred me awake whenever I drifted off. Call buttons, staff conversations, someone down the hall moaning in their sleep. By morning, I felt hollowed out. A cheerful aide named Mia knocked at precisely 7 a.m., ready to help me dress and escort me to breakfast. I politely but firmly informed her I could manage on my own. "Of course, Mrs. Reynolds," she said with a knowing smile. "But I'll check back in 20 minutes. Breakfast stops serving at 8 sharp." The dining room buzzed with the quiet energy of 30 or so residents in various stages of awareness. Some ate independently, others were assisted by staff. A few stared blankly at untouched plates. I chose a seat at a table with two alert-looking women who nodded in greeting. "New arrival?" asked the taller one, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob. "I'm Olivia. This is Greta." Greta, tiny with enormous glasses, studied me intently. "You don't belong here," she declared without preamble. "You're not vacant enough." That startled a laugh out of me, my first since arriving. "Martha Reynolds," I introduced myself. "And no, I don't belong here." "None of us do, dear," Olivia said, stirring her oatmeal. "I was deposited here after I broke my hip. That was 14 months ago. Hip's fine now, but my son has such peace of mind knowing I'm safe while he enjoys my house in Beaverton." The bitterness in her voice resonated with me. Over rubbery eggs and toast, we exchanged abbreviated versions of our stories. Olivia had been a high school principal, Greta a pharmacist. Both widowed, both with adult children who had decided institutional care was more convenient than family support. "The real question," Greta said, leaning in conspiratorially, "is what are you going to do about it?" I hesitated. Until that moment, I hadn't allowed myself to consider fighting back. The shock of being uprooted, the disorientation of this new environment, and the betrayal by my own son had left me reeling. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'm going to figure it out." After breakfast, I explored the facility, mapping exits, noting the staff schedules, locating the communal computer in the activities room. Pine Grove wasn't a high-security establishment. Most residents were physically incapable of leaving unsupervised, rather than being actively prevented from doing so. The front desk was staffed during business hours, but the side entrance by the garden had a simple keypad lock. In the activities room, a handful of residents were engaged in a watercolor class. I bypassed them for the computer in the corner, relieved to find it unoccupied. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered where to begin. My email seemed the logical starting point. The password worked on the third try. I'd changed it recently and was still adapting to the new one. My inbox overflowed with unread messages. I sorted them by sender, focusing first on financial institutions. What I found sent ice through my veins. Confirmation of wire transfers from my investment accounts. Notifications of changed contact information. Updates on the sale of my home, completed just 2 weeks earlier. I clicked through document after document, taking care to leave no obvious trace of my investigation. The sale price of my house, $500,000, was well below its $650,000 market value. The buyer was listed as Cedar Heights Holdings LLC, an entity I'd never heard of. A quick search of Oregon business registrations revealed Cedar Heights Holdings had been established 3 months ago. The registered agent was a law firm I didn't recognize, but the business address matched a P.O. box I did know, one Daniel had set up for his freelance marketing work years ago. My own son had created a shell company to purchase my home at Isatio. A discount. But why? Daniel and Rebecca lived in Lakeside Estates, in the house I'd helped them buy when they couldn't qualify for a traditional mortgage. 5 years ago, I'd used the family trust Robert and I established to privately finance their dream home. A 5-bedroom contemporary with lake views and a pool they couldn't actually afford. The truth hit me with stunning clarity. They weren't just after my house. They wanted everything. My savings, my investments, the family trust. They wanted to drain me dry while warehousing me here at Pine Grove. The temporary stay was never meant to be temporary at all. I was so absorbed in my discovery that I didn't notice Mia approaching until she spoke. "Mrs. Reynolds, your son is on the phone at the front desk. He's checking to see how your first night went." I closed the browser quickly. "Thank you, Mia. I'll take it in my room." I needed time to compose myself, to ensure no hint of my suspicions crept into my voice. Daniel was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. If he sensed I was investigating, who knew what he might do next? The beige phone on my nightstand buzzed. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Daniel." "Mom, how was your first night? Getting settled in okay?" His voice carried the forced cheerfulness I'd grown accustomed to lately, the tone one might use with a child, or more aptly, a senile parent. "It's an adjustment," I said neutrally. "The bed is different. You'll get used to it. They take great care of everyone there." "Did you meet any of the other residents?" "A few at breakfast. Everyone seems..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Nice." I paused, then decided to test him. "Daniel, I was wondering, did you happen to bring my laptop when you moved my things? I thought I might email Emma about her art project." The hesitation was brief but telling. "Oh, Mom, I don't think..." "I saw your laptop. It might still be packed in one of the boxes in storage. But don't worry about emailing Emma. I'll make sure she calls you." Using that computer would just frustrate you anyway. You remember how you were always asking me for help with it? Another lie. I'd worked with computers my entire banking career and maintained my own website for the garden club. But recently, Daniel had begun rewriting history, creating a narrative of an increasingly confused and dependent mother. You're probably right, I conceded, swallowing my anger. I get confused with technology sometimes. Exactly. Just focus on settling in and making friends. Rebecca and I will bring the kids this weekend. Emma's excited to show you her new paintings. After a few more minutes of superficial conversation, we said goodbye. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in my hand, mind racing. I needed proof of what they'd done. I needed access to my accounts, to the trust documents, to the paperwork on my house sale. And I needed to understand exactly what I'd signed in recent months. That was the most troubling part. I had vague memories of Daniel bringing documents, while I was sick with bronchitis a few months ago. Just routine updates, he'd said. Had I signed power of attorney papers? Authorization for the house sale? Access to my accounts? The pieces were starting to fit together. My sudden memory issues conveniently began after that bronchitis bout. The concerned discussions about my safety following my minor fall in the garden. The gradual takeover of my financial affairs for my own protection. I'd been so blindsided by their betrayal that I'd failed to see the methodical way they'd orchestrated my displacement. Perhaps I hadn't wanted to believe my own son capable of such calculated deception. That afternoon, during the scheduled rest period when most residents napped, I used the room phone to call my old neighbor, Thomas Garcia. Thomas was a retired attorney who had been a friend of Robert's. He picked up on the third ring. Martha, is that really you? Where have you been? Your house sold so suddenly, and when I asked Daniel, he said you'd decided to move to a retirement community. The relief of hearing a friendly voice nearly undid me. Thomas, I need your help, I said, keeping my voice low. I'm at Pine Grove Estates Assisted Living. Daniel and Rebecca put me here, and I think they've taken control of my finances, my house, my accounts, everything. His sharp intake of breath confirmed the seriousness of what I was describing. Martha, this sounds like elder abuse. Financial exploitation. Are you saying you didn't agree to sell your house or move to assisted living? The house sale happened without my knowledge. As for Pine Grove, they convinced me it was temporary, just until I recovered from a minor fall. But now I'm seeing evidence they've been planning this for months. I need to know what legal documents I might have signed and how to regain control of my assets. Thomas was silent for a moment. This is beyond my expertise. You need a specialist in elder law and financial fraud. I know someone, Natalie Hammond at Hamilton and Reed. She's handled cases like this before. Can you contact her for me? I have limited phone access here, and I'm not sure how closely they're monitoring my calls. Of course, can you get out for a meeting? We should talk in person, away from Pine Grove. I glanced at the schedule posted by my door. There's a garden club outing tomorrow at 2 p.m. I could possibly slip away then. I'll pick you up. A block from wherever they take you. Text me the location when you know it. After we hung up, I sat motionless, processing the reality of my situation. I was essentially planning an escape, coordinating secret meetings against my own son. The pain of that realization was almost unbearable. How had we come to this? I thought back to Daniel as a boy, sensitive, thoughtful, always eager to help. After Robert died of a heart attack when Daniel was in college, our bond had seemed unbreakable. I'd supported him through graduate school, celebrated his marketing career successes, welcomed Rebecca into our family. I'd helped them buy their dream home when their credit and income couldn't secure a traditional mortgage. Where had that son gone? When had he started seeing me as an obstacle, or worse, as a resource to be drained and discarded? The afternoon passed in a haze of mandatory activities. A bland dinner followed by a movie in the common room that I barely registered. Back in my room, I methodically documented everything I could remember about my finances, my assets, and the documents I might have signed in recent months. If I was going to fight back, I needed to be precise and thorough. That night, I slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of being trapped in maze-like corridors while Daniel and Rebecca packed up my possessions, laughing as they carried them away. I woke before dawn, my nightgown damp with sweat, a sense of urgency pulsing through me. I couldn't afford to wait. With each passing day, they could be transferring more assets, fabricating more evidence of my supposed incapacity, cementing their control over everything I'd spent a lifetime building. That morning, I joined a different table at breakfast, making small talk with residents I hadn't met yet, careful to present myself as pleasantly adjusting to Pine Grove. I participated in morning exercises, nodding agreeably when the activities director commented on how quickly I was settling in. All the while, my mind was cataloging potential allies, evaluating which staff members might be sympathetic, noting the times when supervision was lightest. I wasn't just planning a legal challenge, I was planning a rebellion. The garden club outing couldn't come soon enough. When we finally boarded the small van for the trip to Portland Community Gardens, I felt the first stirring of hope. The facility maintained a plot there, where more mobile residents could enjoy supervised gardening sessions. As we arrived, I texted Thomas using a basic phone Olivia had lent me, her emergency backup that her son didn't know about. Portland Community Gardens, any 42nd Avenue entrance, can break away in 30 minutes. His reply came quickly. Will be there. Silver Honda. For the next half hour, I diligently planted spring bulbs alongside 5 other residents, chatting casually with our supervisor, a young man named Jake, who was clearly more interested in his phone than in monitoring us closely. When he stepped away to take a call, I whispered to Olivia, "Cover for me. I need to meet someone." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Honey, I'll create such a distraction they won't notice you're gone until dinner. Go." I didn't ask what she planned, but the gleam in her eye suggested it would be effective. Walking casually toward the composting area, I slipped behind a large shed, then quickly made my way to the street. Thomas's silver Honda idled at the curb, exactly as promised. "Martha," he greeted me, concern evident in his lined face. "You look well, all things considered." "I'm managing," I replied, buckling my seatbelt. "Where are we meeting Natalie?" "Her office downtown. She's cleared her schedule for the next 2 hours." As we navigated through Portland's midday traffic, I filled Thomas in on everything I'd discovered. The suspicious house sale, the shell company, the unauthorized account transfers. The most frustrating part is not knowing exactly what I signed, I admitted. I remember Daniel bringing documents while I was sick, but the details are foggy. I was on strong medication for the bronchitis. Thomas's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "If you were medicated and he misrepresented, what you were signing, that's fraud, Martha." Clear and simple. The offices of Hamilton and Reed occupied half a floor in a sleek downtown building. Natalie Hammond met us in the reception area. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thomas has briefed me on your situation. I've handled dozens of cases involving financial exploitation of seniors, but I must say, the apparent involvement of your son in creating a shell company to purchase your home is particularly troubling." In her corner office, with Portland's Ida skyline spread out behind her, Natalie listened intently as I detailed everything I could remember. She took meticulous notes, occasionally stopping me to clarify specific dates or details. "Based on what you've described, we need to move quickly. On several fronts," she said when I finished. "First, we need to determine exactly what documents you signed and under what circumstances. Second, We need to freeze your remaining assets before more can be transferred. Third, we need to invalidate any power of attorney Daniel may have obtained fraudulently. And my house? I asked. If we can prove the sale was executed without your informed consent, especially if Daniel created a shell company to purchase it below market value, we can potentially void the transaction. She paused. But there's another angle here that gives us significant leverage. The mortgage, I said, understanding immediately. She nodded. You financed their home purchase through your family trust. Have they maintained payments? They stopped paying 4 months ago, right around when discussions about my safety began. A smile crossed Natalie's face. Not warm, but satisfied, like a chess player seeing the path to checkmate. Then they're in default. As the lender, you have the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. I don't want to make my grandchildren homeless, I said quickly. I just want my life back. The foreclosure is leverage, Martha, Thomas interjected, gently. It gives us negotiating power. Natalie nodded. Exactly. Now I'm going to prepare emergency injunction paperwork to freeze all contested assets. I'll also file to invalidate any power of attorney Daniel may be using based on the circumstances under which it was obtained. Over the next hour, I signed multiple documents, each one a step toward reclaiming control of my life. As Thomas drove me back toward the garden, where I would slip back into the group before returning to Pine Grove, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. What happens next? I asked. Natalie will file everything first thing tomorrow. Daniel and Rebecca should receive notice within 72 hours. Once that happens, things will move quickly. I gazed out the window at the familiar streets of Portland, the city where I'd built my career, raised my son, and planned to live out my days in the home Robert and I had shared. Soon I would reclaim that life, but I knew it would never be quite the same. The betrayal had changed me. I felt a new hardness forming where unconditional trust had once lived. Perhaps that was necessary. A carapace to protect me from being wounded again. But I mourned the loss of that simpler relationship. When I could look at my son and see only the boy I'd raised, not the man who had conspired to take everything from me. We're here, Thomas said, pulling over a block from the community garden. Call me from Olivia's phone tonight if you can. I squeezed his hand in gratitude. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have figured something out, he said with certainty. You've always been formidable, Martha. Daniel seems to have forgotten that. As I slipped back into the garden, finding my place beside Olivia, who was regaling the group with increasingly outlandish stories that had captured everyone's attention, I thought about Thomas's words. Formidable. Yes, I had been once. It was time to remind my son exactly who he was dealing with. Not a confused old woman to be tucked away and forgotten, but Martha Reynolds, who had never in her life surrendered what was rightfully hers without a fight. And I was just getting started. The next morning at Pine Grove began like any other. Breakfast at 8:00 sharp, medication dispensed with mechanical efficiency, followed by a group session euphemistically called cognitive enhancement, essentially, word puzzles designed for people with actual memory issues. I completed mine in minutes, earning concerned glances from the activity director. Mrs. Reynolds, there's no rush, she said, gently pulling my worksheet away. We have the full hour scheduled for this. I smiled apologetically. Force of habit. I used to process loan applications under tight deadlines. She patted my hand with the particular condescension reserved for the elderly. That was then. Now we focus on being present and taking things slowly. Taking things slowly was exactly what I couldn't afford to do. Somewhere across town, Natalie Hammond was filing emergency injunctions on my behalf. Soon, Daniel and Rebecca would discover their carefully constructed plan was unraveling. I needed to prepare for their reaction. During afternoon rest period, I used Olivia's contraband phone to call Thomas. Natalie filed everything this morning, he confirmed. Daniel should receive notification by courier tomorrow at the latest. I should prepare for him to show up here, I said. Almost certainly. Are you ready for that confrontation? I considered the question carefully. Yes and no. I know what needs to be said, but actually facing him. How do you prepare to confront the child you raised, the person you trusted most in the world, about their systematic betrayal? No parenting book covers that scenario. Thomas seemed to understand my hesitation. You don't have to handle this alone, Martha. I can be there when he comes. No, I decided firmly. This is between Daniel and me, at least initially. After hanging up, I sought out Olivia in the common room, where she was demolishing some unfortunate man at chess. Checkmate, she announced triumphantly, then noticed me hovering nearby. Martha, care to lose next? I smiled but shook my head. Rain check. Could we talk privately? In my room, I filled her in on the legal proceedings, then asked the question. That had been bothering me since yesterday. The staff monitors visitors, but they don't record conversations, do they? Olivia snorted. They barely have enough people to keep old Hank from wandering into the women's showers. Private conversations are just that. Private. Why? I expect my son will be visiting soon, once he receives the legal notifications. I need to make sure our conversation isn't reported back to management in a way that could make me sound confused or irrational. Understanding dawned on Olivia's face. You're worried he might try to claim you're having an episode to discredit your legal challenge. Exactly. She considered this, tapping one finger against her chin. Easy enough. I'll create a distraction if any staff lingers too close. Trust me, I've gotten quite good at it. 14 months of practice. I squeezed her hand gratefully. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet, she warned. The real fight is just beginning. That night, sleep evaded me completely. I lay awake rehearsing what I would say to Daniel, imagining his responses, preparing counter-arguments. By morning, dark circles shadowed my eyes, but my resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. I was in the middle of lunch, a bland chicken salad sandwich that tasted of nothing in particular, when Mia approached my table. Mrs. Reynolds, your son and his wife are here to see you, she announced cheerfully. Such a nice surprise. They're waiting in the visitors' lounge. Olivia caught my eye from across the room, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I gave a slight nod, and she immediately knocked over her water glass, creating a minor commotion as she apologized loudly and repeatedly to the staff rushing to help. With everyone distracted, I slipped away to face my son. The visitors' lounge was designed to mimic a comfortable living room, with sofas arranged in conversational groupings and large windows overlooking the garden. Daniel and Rebecca sat stiffly, on a floral love seat, tension evident in every line of their bodies. When they saw me, both stood. Mom, Daniel began, his voice carefully controlled. We need to talk. Yes, I agreed, remaining standing. We do. Rebecca glanced around nervously. Is there somewhere more private? The garden, perhaps? I suggested, gesturing toward the door leading outside. It's lovely this time of year. They followed me to a secluded bench beneath a flowering dogwood. Once seated, an uncomfortable silence settled over us. I waited, letting them make the first substantive move. Daniel pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. We received this today. He extracted the court documents, handling them like something contaminated. What is this, Mom? Why are you doing this? I met his gaze steadily. I think the better question is, what have you been doing, Daniel? Selling my house without my knowledge? Emptying my accounts? Creating a shell company to hide your actions? Placing me in assisted living under false pretenses? Rebecca flinched, but Daniel's expression hardened. That's not what happened. We've been trying to protect you. After your fall. My bruised knee, I corrected flatly. And the increasing memory lapses, the confusion with your medications. There were no memory lapses, I interrupted again. No confusion with medications. Those were narratives you created to justify taking control of my assets. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet. Martha, we're concerned about these delusions you're having. The doctor said this might happen. Paranoia, conspiracy theories, it's part of the cognitive decline. Which doctor? I challenged. Certainly not Dr. Chen, who has been my physician for 15 years, and who, incidentally, has provided a sworn statement confirming I have no cognitive impairment whatsoever. That seemed to catch them off guard. Daniel recovered first. Mom, I don't know what this lawyer has been telling you, but there's been a serious misunderstanding. We never intended to get caught, I finished for him. I think that part is obvious. His face flushed. That's not fair. Something snapped inside me. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to sell my home, the home your father and I worked decades to pay off, without my knowledge? Was it fair to create a shell company so you could purchase it below market value? Was it fair to stop making mortgage payments on your own home while simultaneously draining my accounts? Daniel paled visibly, and Rebecca's eyes widened in alarm. They hadn't expected me to know about the defaulted mortgage. That's right, I continued, my voice low but intense. I know about the mortgage default. 4 months of missed payments, while you were clearing out my investment accounts. Did you think I wouldn't notice, or did you simply not care? Business has been slow, Daniel mumbled. We were going to catch up on the payments. With my money, I said, not a question but a statement of fact. Rebecca stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Daniel, we should go. She's clearly not in her right mind. I remained perfectly calm. Ms. Hammond has filed for an emergency injunction, freezing all contested assets, which includes virtually everything you've taken from me in the past 6 months. She's also moved to invalidate the power of attorney you obtained while I was medicated for bronchitis. Daniel's expression shifted from defensiveness to alarm. Mom, you're making a huge mistake. We're your family. These lawyers don't care about you. They just want your money. The irony of his statement was almost laughable. That's an interesting perspective from someone who just sold his mother's house to himself at a $150,000 discount. Rebecca tugged at Daniel's arm. We need to call Jason, she hissed, referring, I assumed, to their financial advisor. Daniel ignored her, his eyes locked on mine. What do you want from us, Mom? The directness of the question caught me off guard. What did I want? Justice, revenge, an apology, my old life back? I want what's mine, I said finally. My house, my accounts, my dignity. And I want you to understand that what you've done is not just immoral, it's illegal. We were trying to secure your future. By securing yours, I cut him off. Let's be honest for once, Daniel. This was never about my well-being. It was about my assets. A flicker of shame crossed his face, quickly replaced by calculation. And what about Emma and Lucas, your grandchildren? Have you thought about how this will affect them? There it was, the emotional manipulation I'd expected, using my grandchildren as shields against accountability. I think about them constantly, I replied, my voice softening slightly. I think about what example we're setting for them. What values we're demonstrating. Is this what you want to teach them? That it's acceptable to take advantage of family members when they become inconvenient? Before he could respond, my next words came almost unbidden. Your father would be ashamed of you, Daniel. The moment I said it, I knew I had struck a nerve. Daniel physically recoiled as if I'd slapped him. Robert had been his hero, his moral compass. Invoking his father's disappointment was perhaps the cruelest card I could have played, but also the most honest. For a moment, the facade cracked. Daniel's eyes glistened, and I glimpsed the boy I'd raised, sensitive, easily wounded by disapproval. But then Rebecca's hand closed over his shoulder, and the vulnerability vanished. "We're done here," she declared. "Our lawyer will contact yours. Come on, Daniel." He stood mechanically, avoiding my gaze. As they turned to leave, I called after them. "One more thing. You will bring Emma and Lucas to visit me this weekend, as originally promised. They deserve to know their grandmother hasn't abandoned them." Daniel hesitated, then nodded curtly before they walked away. I remained on the bench, watching dogwood petals drift to the ground, feeling hollow despite having held my ground. The confrontation had gone more or less as I'd expected, but the reality of facing my son, seeing the calculation in his eyes, the momentary flash of shame, the quick recovery, had drained me in ways I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't a simple legal dispute with strangers. This was my son, my only child. The boy I'd nursed through childhood illnesses, whose nightmares I'd soothed, whose accomplishments I'd celebrated. Somewhere along the way, that boy had become a man capable of betraying the parent who sacrificed everything for him. I didn't realize I was crying until Olivia appeared silently beside me, pressing a tissue into my hand. "That bad?" she asked softly. "That necessary," I replied, wiping my eyes. "But yes, that bad." She sat beside me, her thin shoulder pressed against mine in silent support. The first confrontation is always the hardest. It gets easier. Does it? Did it get easier with your son? Olivia gazed at the dogwood tree, her expression distant. Not easier, perhaps, but clearer. Each time I stood up for myself, the guilt diminished a little. The fog of self-doubt lifted incrementally. That evening, Thomas called for an update. I gave him a synopsis of the confrontation, trying to keep my voice steady. Natalie says, "The judge was concerned about the evidence of financial exploitation," he reported. "The emergency injunction was granted. All contested assets are frozen pending a formal hearing. Daniel and Rebecca can't touch your accounts, sell your house, or access the trust funds." "That's something, at least," I murmured. "It's more than something, Martha. It's the first step toward regaining control." After we hung up, I sat at the small desk in my room, making notes about everything that had transpired. The banker in me needed the facts organized, documented, indisputable. But another part of me was struggling with more nebulous questions. How had I missed the signs? Had there been warnings I'd ignored? Could I have prevented this if I'd been less trusting, more vigilant? And the question that haunted me most: could I ever truly forgive Daniel, even if everything was restored? The next few days passed in a strange limbo. I participated in Pine Grove's scheduled activities with mechanical compliance, all while communicating regularly with Natalie and Thomas about the legal proceedings. Daniel didn't call, didn't visit. The weekend approached, and I wondered if he would honor his grudging agreement to bring the grandchildren. Saturday morning found me dressed in my nicest outfit, a blue cashmere sweater and tailored slacks I'd insisted on bringing to Pine Grove. I applied makeup carefully, arranged my silver hair neatly, and waited in my room for the visit that might not come. At precisely 11 a.m., Mia appeared at my door. "Mrs. Reynolds, your grandchildren are here. What handsome young people." Relief washed through me as I followed her to the visitors' lounge. Emma and Lucas stood awkwardly by the window, Daniel nowhere in sight. "Grandma!" Lucas broke protocol first, rushing forward to hug me. At 10, he was still openly affectionate, unburdened by teenage self-consciousness. Emma followed more hesitantly, but her embrace was no less genuine. "We missed you," she said. Simply her 14-year-old gravity both amusing and touching. "I've missed you both terribly," I replied, holding them at arm's length to look at them properly. Tell me everything I've missed. For the next hour, I listened as they caught me up on school projects, sports victories, friend dramas. Neither mentioned my sudden move to Pine Grove or the tension between their parents and me, though Emma's searching glances suggested awareness beyond what she expressed. "Dad's waiting in the car," Lucas mentioned eventually. "He said we have an hour." So Daniel wasn't even willing to face me again. I swallowed my disappointment. "Well then, we should make the most of our time. Tell me about your art showcase, Emma. I was so sorry to miss it." She brightened. "It went really well. My watercolor series won second place overall. Dad said, 'You weren't feeling well enough to come, but I saved you the program.'" She dug in her backpack and produced a glossy booklet. "Thank you, sweetheart. Next time I'll be there front row center, I promise." As our visit drew to a close, Emma hung back while Lucas gathered his things. "Grandma," she said quietly, "are you okay here? Really okay?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the legal battle, on exposing Daniel and Rebecca's manipulation, that I hadn't considered how my situation might appear to my grandchildren. "I'm managing," I answered carefully. "But this isn't where I want to be, Emma. I was perfectly happy in my own home." She nodded, a look of adult understanding crossing her young face. "Dad and Mom have been fighting a lot, about money mostly, and now about you. I'm sorry you have to hear that." "It's okay." She hesitated, then added, "I heard Mom say they shouldn't have rushed things with your house, that they should have waited until—" She stopped abruptly. "Until what, Emma?" She shook her head, uncomfortable now. "Nothing. I shouldn't be talking about this." I touched her cheek gently. "You can always talk to me about anything. No matter what's happening between the adults in this family, you and Lucas are always, always my priority." Her eyes welled with tears. "I don't want you to be stuck here if you don't want to be." "I'm working on that," I assured her. "Now you'd better go before your father starts worrying. But I want you to have this." I pressed a slip of paper into her hand with Olivia's phone number. "If you ever need to reach me directly, call this number and ask for Olivia Parker. She'll get a message to me." Emma tucked the paper into her pocket with a solemn nod. After they left, I returned to my room feeling both uplifted and disturbed. The connection with my grandchildren remained strong, but Emma's unfinished sentence bothered me. They should have waited until— What? Until I was less aware? Until I was truly incapacitated? Until I was dead? The implications chilled me. That evening, while most residents were gathered in the common room for movie night, I used the shared computer. Again, this time to access something I hadn't thought to check before: my email trash folder. There, I found dozens of deleted messages dating back months, financial statements, legal communications, notifications of account changes. Someone had been accessing my email, deleting evidence of their financial maneuvers. Given the timing and content of the deletions, there was only one possible culprit. I printed several key emails, then carefully restored the trash folder to its previous state, not wanting to alert Daniel that I'd discovered this additional layer of deception. Back in my room, I added these new documents to my growing file, then called Natalie using Olivia's phone. "This proves premeditation," she said after I explained what I'd found. "They were monitoring and manipulating your communications for months before moving you to Pine Grove. It strengthens our case significantly." "What's our next step?" "The formal hearing is scheduled for Tuesday morning. The judge wants to see you in person." My heart raced. I'll be there, whatever it takes. Attending the hearing would require another orchestrated escape from Pine Grove, but with Olivia's help and Thomas's transportation, I was confident we could manage it. What concerned me more was facing Daniel across a courtroom, making our private betrayal a matter of public record, yet I saw no alternative. He and Rebecca had forced my hand through their actions, their deceptions, their fundamental betrayal of trust. If I wanted my life back, my home, my financial security, my independence, I would have to fight for it in the most public way possible. Sunday passed in quiet preparation. I reviewed my documentation, practiced what I would say to the judge, and tried to center myself emotionally for what was to come. Olivia introduced me to several other residents who had suffered similar fates, placed in Pine Grove by family members more interested in their assets than their welfare. Their stories strengthened my resolve. Monday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Wilson, the facility director, requested a private meeting in her office. Her workspace was predictably sterile. Beige walls adorned with generic certificates, desk meticulously organized. She gestured for me to sit in the visitor's chair across from her. "Mrs. Reynolds, how are you settling in at Pine Grove?" She began with practiced warmth. "As well as can be expected," I replied neutrally. She nodded, consulting a file open before her. "I see you've been participating in activities, making friends. That's wonderful." She paused, folding her hands. "However, I've received some concerning information from your family about potential confusion you might be experiencing." There it was. Daniel was making preemptive moves, trying to establish a record of cognitive impairment before the hearing. "What sort of confusion would that be, Ms. Wilson?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Your son mentioned you've been making accusations about financial matters, contacting attorneys, expressing paranoid thoughts about being held here against your will." She smiled sympathetically. "These are not uncommon reactions during the adjustment period, especially for individuals beginning to experience cognitive changes." I considered my response carefully. This conversation was almost certainly being documented and could potentially be used against me. "Ms. Wilson, I appreciate your concern. However, I am of sound mind, as my physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, has documented. The legal matters between my son and me are exactly that. Legal matters involving financial decisions I did not authorize." Her smile tightened. "Mrs. Reynolds, we often find that residents in your situation benefit from our memory care support groups. I'd like to recommend you begin attending those sessions, and perhaps we should adjust your medication regimen. Dr. Winters, our staff physician, could evaluate you this afternoon." "That won't be necessary," I replied firmly. "I decline any additional medications or evaluations from physicians I haven't selected myself. As for memory care support groups, I'll consider your recommendation, but as I have no memory impairment, I doubt they would be beneficial." She seemed taken aback by my clarity and assertiveness. "Mrs. Reynolds, is there anything else, Ms. Wilson? I believe the gardening group begins in 15 minutes, and I wouldn't want to be late." Our eyes locked in silent confrontation. She was accustomed to residents yielding to her authority, accepting her recommendations without question. I had no intention of playing that role. "No, that's all for now," she conceded. "But I do think this conversation highlights some concerning patterns in your thinking. I'll be discussing this with your son." "I'm sure you will," I said pleasantly, as I stood to leave. "Please document our conversation accurately in my file. My attorney would be very interested in any mischaracterizations of my mental state." As I walked back to my room, I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from anger. The system was designed to strip elders of agency, to pathologize any resistance as confusion or paranoia. Pine Grove wasn't merely housing me. It was actively participating in the narrative Daniel had constructed. Tomorrow's hearing couldn't come soon enough. That evening, I finalized plans with Thomas and Olivia. I would join the morning walking group that regularly circled the facility grounds, then slip away at the northeast corner where the supervision was lightest. Thomas would meet me a block away with professional clothes I could change into before the courthouse. "Everything is arranged," Thomas confirmed. Natalie will meet us directly at the courthouse with all the documentation. And if Pine Grove notices I'm missing, I asked. By then, you'll be under the court's authority, he assured me. Even if they report you missing, the police won't interfere with a legal proceeding. I spent that night alternating between anxiety and determination. This wasn't how I had envisioned my 70s, sneaking out of an assisted living facility to take my own son to court. Yet here I was, preparing to do exactly that, with no guarantee of success. What would happen if the judge ruled against me? If Daniel and Rebecca convinced the court that their actions were justified? I would be returned to Pine Grove, likely with increased restrictions, possibly with forced medication. The thought was terrifying. Yet the alternative, accepting my fate, surrendering my autonomy, allowing them to profit from my displacement, was unthinkable. I hadn't fought my way up through the banking industry as a woman in the 1970s and 80s to simply acquiesce in my 70s. Dawn found me dressed and ready, my small bag of essentials hidden under my bed. I joined breakfast with forced normalcy, making casual conversation with other residents, careful not to draw attention. At 9:30, I joined the walking group assembling, in the lobby, nodding to Olivia, who would create a distraction if needed. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect for the slow procession of elderly residents circling the manicured grounds of Pine Grove. I positioned myself at the back of the group, paced deliberately unhurried. As we rounded the northeast corner, I gradually increased the distance between myself and the others. The moment the group turned west, continuing their circuit, I slipped behind a large rhododendron, heart pounding. No shouts of alarm followed. No one had noticed. I walked briskly to the perimeter fence, finding the section where the landscaping created a natural screen from the facility's windows. With a final glance back at Pine Grove, the place that had been my prison for the past 3 months, I ducked through a gap in the hedge and emerged onto a quiet residential street. Thomas's car waited exactly where promised. I slid into the passenger seat with a sense of triumph that surprised me with its intensity. "Ready to reclaim your life, Martha?" he asked, putting the car in drive. I took a deep breath, facing forward. More than ready. As we drove toward the courthouse where Daniel and Rebecca would soon arrive, I straightened my shoulders, mentally preparing for the confrontation to come. This hearing wasn't just about assets and documents and legal technicalities. It was about something far more fundamental. It was about standing up and declaring that my life, my wishes, my independence, my dignity, still mattered. That being 72 didn't make me disposable. That family ties didn't grant permission to deceive and exploit. Today, I would look my son in the eye across a courtroom and show him exactly who I was. Not a confused old woman to be managed and manipulated, but Martha Reynolds, clear-eyed, determined, and absolutely unwilling to disappear quietly. The woman who still owned their mortgage, and who was about to foreclose on more than just their house. The Portland County Courthouse stood like a fortress of marble and granite, its imposing facade a physical manifestation of the authority it housed within. Thomas guided me up the broad steps, his hand steady beneath my elbow, though I needed no assistance. We passed through security, the metal detector beeping briefly at the watch Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary, the one possession I had refused to leave behind at Pine Grove. Natalie Hammond waited for us in the corridor outside courtroom 3B, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Her confident smile bolstered my resolve. "Mrs. Reynolds, you're looking well," she greeted me, her appraising gaze taking in the navy suit Thomas had brought for me, my own clothing, rescued from storage. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing down the jacket. After weeks of Pine Grove's polyester loungewear, the tailored wool felt like armor. "The judge assigned to our case is Eleanor Blackwell," Natalie explained as we walked. "She has a reputation for being thorough and fair, particularly in elder law cases. She'll want to hear directly from you, so we've prepared for that." Inside the courtroom, the familiar scent of wood polish and paper transported me momentarily to my banking days, when I occasionally testified in financial disputes. The room was modestly sized, with 2 tables facing the judge's bench, spectator seating behind a waist-high barrier, and the state seal mounted prominently on the wall. We were early, so Natalie used the time to review key points with me once more. Remember, speak clearly and directly. If you don't understand something, ask for clarification. Judge Blackwell will want to evaluate your cognitive clarity herself. So this is as much about demonstrating your competence as it is about the legal facts. I nodded, my attention caught by movement at the courtroom doors. Daniel and Rebecca entered, followed by a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who I assumed was their attorney. They looked polished but strained. Rebecca's makeup slightly too heavy, Daniel's tie askew despite its Windsor knot. Our eyes met across the room. Daniel faltered mid-step before Rebecca urged him forward with a hand at his back. They took their seats at the opposite table without acknowledging me further. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Blackwell entered, a tall woman in her 60s with elegant silver hair pulled into a low chignon. Her expression revealed nothing as she took her seat and reviewed the documents before her. "Good morning," she began, her voice precise and measured. "We're here regarding case number 2023 CV4872, Reynolds versus Reynolds. This is a hearing on allegations of financial exploitation of an elder and contested power of attorney. I've reviewed the filings from both parties." She looked up, her gaze moving between our tables. "Ms. Hammond, as the petitioner's counsel, please present your case." Natalie rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the facts in this case are straightforward, but deeply troubling. My client, Martha Reynolds, was placed in assisted living against her will following a minor fall that resulted in no significant injury. Prior to this placement, while Mrs. Reynolds was medicated for bronchitis, her son, Daniel Reynolds, presented her with documents to sign, claiming they were routine estate planning updates. She gestured toward our evidence binders. In reality, Mrs. Reynolds was signing a power of attorney that her son subsequently used to sell her home to a shell company he created, Cedar Heights Holdings LLC, at $150,000 below market value. He then transferred over $300,000 from her accounts into accounts he controlled, all while making her believe she was experiencing cognitive decline. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Natalie continued. "Most egregiously, Your Honor, while systematically dismantling his mother's financial security, Mr. Reynolds stopped making payments on his own home's mortgage, a mortgage that Mrs. Reynolds herself holds through a family trust established specifically to help her son purchase a home he couldn't otherwise afford." Judge Blackwell's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Reynolds financed her son's home purchase?" "Yes, Your Honor. 5 years ago, when Mr. Reynolds and his wife were unable to qualify for a conventional mortgage due to insufficient income and credit issues, Mrs. Reynolds used the family trust established by her late husband to finance their home purchase privately. Mr. Reynolds has been in default on that mortgage for 4 months, coinciding exactly with the period during which he began transferring his mother's assets." The judge made a note, then looked toward Daniel's table. "Mr. Harrington, your response?" Daniel's attorney rose, adjusting his cuffs in a practiced gesture. "Your Honor, while Ms. Hammond has presented a provocative narrative, the reality is far less sensational. My clients have been increasingly concerned about Mrs. Reynolds' cognitive health for over a year. The fall she experienced was symptomatic of broader coordination and judgment issues that had been escalating." I gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to interrupt as he continued spinning his fabrication. The power of attorney was executed properly, with Mrs. Reynolds' full understanding and consent. The home sale was conducted to free up equity that was otherwise sitting idle, with proceeds intended for Mrs. Reynolds' long-term care. As for the mortgage payments, my clients have experienced temporary financial challenges but fully intend to resume payments imminently. Judge Blackwell's expression remained neutral. And the shell company? Cedar Heights Holdings? Mr. Harrington hesitated fractionally. A standard asset protection vehicle, Your Honor. Given the litigious nature of real estate transactions, many financial advisors recommend such structures. I see. The judge turned her attention directly to me. Mrs. Reynolds, I'd like to hear from you personally about these matters. Natalie nodded encouragingly as I rose and moved to the witness stand. After being sworn in, I sat with my back straight, hands folded calmly in my lap. Mrs. Reynolds, Judge Blackwell began, please tell me in your own words what has transpired over the past 6 months regarding your living situation and finances. I took a measured breath. Your Honor, until 3 months ago, I lived independently in the Cedar Heights neighborhood of Portland, in the home my late husband Robert and I purchased 30 years ago. Following my retirement from First Oregon Community Bank, where I served as an executive for 15 years, I maintained an active lifestyle, gardening, volunteering, spending time with my grandchildren. I glanced briefly at Daniel, whose gaze remained fixed on the table before him. In February, I experienced a minor fall while gardening, a stumble that resulted in a bruised knee, nothing more. My son and daughter-in-law used this incident to begin suggesting I needed supervision for my safety. Methodically, I recounted the progression of events, the bronchitis, the documents presented while I was medicated, the gradual takeover of my finances, the escalating claims about my supposed memory issues, and finally, my placement at Pine Grove Estates. I discovered what had actually happened only after gaining access to a computer at Pine Grove and reviewing my financial records. My house had been sold without my knowledge to a company my son created. My accounts had been systematically emptied. And all of this occurred while Daniel stopped making payments on the mortgage I provided for his family's home. Judge Blackwell studied me intently throughout my testimony, occasionally asking clarifying questions that I answered directly and completely. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Reynolds, do you have documentation of your medical status? Evaluations of your cognitive function? Yes, Your Honor. Natalie presented Dr. Chen's comprehensive evaluation, completed just days earlier, confirming I had no cognitive impairment whatsoever. The judge reviewed it carefully before turning to Daniel's table. Mr. Reynolds, please take the stand. Daniel moved stiffly to the witness box, his complexion ashen. After being sworn in, he sat with shoulders hunched, a posture I recognized from his childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. Mr. Reynolds, Judge Blackwell began, did you create Cedar Heights Holdings, LLC? He swallowed visibly. Yes, Your Honor. And did you use that company to purchase your mother's home? Yes, but did you disclose to your mother that you were the buyer? He hesitated. Not explicitly, Your Honor. I was concerned it would confuse her. The judge's expression hardened slightly. Yet, Dr. Chen's evaluation indicates no confusion or cognitive impairment. How do you reconcile these contradictions? Daniel glanced desperately at his attorney. My mother has good days and bad days. Your Honor, she can be very convincing when she wants to be. I see. Judge Blackwell consulted her notes. And the mortgage payments? You've been in default for 4 months while simultaneously transferring substantial sums from your mother's accounts into your own. Can you explain that timing? Daniel's facade began to crumble visibly. We've had financial difficulties. Business has been slow, and with the children's school expenses. So you decided to solve your financial difficulties by using your power of attorney to access your mother's funds, while simultaneously defaulting on payments owed to her through the family trust? Put so bluntly, the exploitation was undeniable. Daniel's shoulders sagged. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. How was it supposed to happen, Mr. Reynolds? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. We were going to take care of her, make sure she had everything she needed at Pine Grove. while simultaneously benefiting from her assets, the judge observed coolly. After Daniel stepped down, Rebecca took the stand briefly, attempting to paint a picture of concerned family members making difficult decisions for a loved one's welfare. Her testimony rang hollow against the documented evidence of financial transfers and the shell company creation. When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Blackwell called a 30-minute recess to review all evidence before ruling. Thomas, Natalie, and I waited in a small conference room, sipping water and avoiding speculation about the outcome. "You did beautifully," Natalie assured me. "Your testimony was clear, coherent, and compelling." I nodded absently, more focused on Daniel's demeanor than my own performance. I had expected anger, defensiveness, perhaps even hostility. Instead, he had seemed defeated, almost resigned. It wasn't the reaction I had anticipated, and it left me unsettled. When we returned to the courtroom, Daniel and Rebecca were already seated, not speaking to each other. The tension between them was palpable even from across the room. Judge Blackwell entered and resumed her position, a stack of documents arranged neatly before her. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, I'm prepared to rule," she announced. "First, regarding the power of attorney executed. In February, I find substantial evidence that this document was obtained under questionable circumstances while Mrs. Reynolds was medicated and without full disclosure of its contents and implications. Therefore, I am invalidating this power of attorney effective immediately." Relief washed through me as she continued. "Second, regarding the sale of Mrs. Reynolds' home to Cedar Heights Holdings, LLC, I find this transaction constitutes self-dealing and fails to meet the fiduciary standard required when acting under power of attorney. The sale is hereby rescinded, with the property to be returned to Mrs. Reynolds' ownership immediately." Daniel stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable, as Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. "Third, regarding the financial transfers from Mrs. Reynolds' accounts. All transferred funds must be returned in full within 30 days, with a detailed accounting provided to this court and to Mrs. Reynolds' counsel." Judge Blackwell paused, then addressed me directly. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you wish to pursue foreclosure on your son's mortgage given the default status?" All eyes turned to me. This was the moment of decision, whether to exercise the ultimate financial leverage I held over Daniel and Rebecca. I could take their home, just as they had attempted to take mine. I thought of my grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, who called that house home. I thought of the devastating impact foreclosure would have on their lives, already disrupted by their parents, financial scheming, and the resulting legal battle. "No, Your Honor," I said finally. "I do not wish to foreclose. However, I would request that the mortgage be restructured with more stringent oversight, perhaps through a neutral third-party trustee, to ensure future payments are made promptly and properly." Judge Blackwell nodded approvingly. "A reasonable request. I will order such restructuring, with monthly reports to be provided to both Mrs. Reynolds and this court for the next 2 years." She turned her attention back to Daniel and Rebecca. "While Mrs. Reynolds has chosen not to pursue foreclosure, I want to be absolutely clear about the seriousness of what has occurred here. The actions taken against Mrs. Reynolds constitute elder financial abuse, which is not only civilly actionable, but potentially criminally prosecutable." Rebecca paled visibly as the judge continued. "I am deliberately not referring this matter to the district attorney at this time, out of consideration for Mrs. Reynolds' expressed wishes and the family relationships involved. However, should there be any further attempts to exploit Mrs. Reynolds, financially or to interfere with her independence, I will not hesitate to make such a referral." With a final tap of her gavel, Judge Blackwell concluded the hearing. "My written order will be issued by the end of day. This matter is adjourned." As the courtroom began to empty, I remained seated, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just transpired. I had won, completely and unequivocally. My home would be returned, my finances restored. my independence recognized and protected by court order. Yet victory felt hollow as I watched Daniel and Rebecca gather their belongings, still not looking at each other, still not acknowledging me. There would be no reconciliation today, perhaps not for a very long time, if ever. Thomas touched my shoulder gently. "Martha, are you all right?" "Just processing," I assured him, rising slowly. "What happens now, Natalie?" "Practically speaking, we'll need to coordinate your return home once the property transfer is completed, which should take about a week. You'll need to notify Pine Grove of your departure, though I suspect news of your courtroom appearance today may precede that conversation." She was right. By the time Thomas drove me back to Pine Grove to collect my few belongings, the director's office had already received multiple calls from Daniel, from their attorney, and apparently from another resident's family member who had been in court for an unrelated matter and recognized me. Margaret Wilson's welcoming smile had vanished, replaced by tight-lipped formality as she presented me with discharge paperwork. "We'll need 30 days' notice before terminating residency," she began, sliding forms across her desk. Natalie, who had accompanied us specifically for this conversation, interjected smoothly. "Actually, Ms. Wilson, given that Mrs. Reynolds' placement was enacted through a now invalidated power of attorney, and considering the court's findings regarding the circumstances of that placement, the standard notice period is waived. Mrs. Reynolds will be departing today." Wilson's mouth thinned further. "There are procedures. There are also laws against false imprisonment," Natalie countered pleasantly. "Mrs. Reynolds is leaving today, with a full refund of the monthly fee that was inappropriately charged to her accounts. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to explain Pine Grove's involvement in this situation to Adult Protective Services." The threat was clear, and Wilson capitulated quickly. Within an hour, I had packed my meager possessions, said heartfelt goodbyes to Olivia and other friends I'd made, and walked out of Pine Grove's front entrance, this time with no need for subterfuge or escape plans. The drive to Thomas's home, where I would stay temporarily until my house was formally returned, felt surreal. Portland's familiar streets flowed past the car windows, the city continuing its normal rhythms while my entire life had been upended, contested, and now partially restored. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Thomas asked as we turned onto his tree-lined street. "I'm wondering if I did the right thing," I admitted. "Not pursuing foreclosure, not pressing criminal charges. Perhaps I've been too lenient." He parked in his driveway and turned to face me. "Martha, leniency and wisdom aren't the same thing. You protected yourself without destroying your family completely. That's not weakness. It's strategic compassion." Strategic compassion. The phrase resonated with something deep within me. I had won the battle while leaving open the possibility, however slight, of eventual reconciliation. Not for Daniel and Rebecca's sake, but for Emma and Lucas. For the future of our family, whatever shape it might eventually take. Thomas's guest room was comfortably appointed, with a bay window overlooking his garden. After weeks in Pine Grove's institutional setting, the simple pleasure of a quilt-covered bed in a real home brought tears to my eyes. That evening, as we shared a quiet dinner, my phone rang. My actual cell phone, which Thomas had retrieved from storage along with my clothes. The screen displayed Emma's name. "Grandma." Her voice was tentative. "Dad told us what happened in court today. Are you really coming home?" "Yes, sweetheart. Just as soon as the paperwork is finished." "Are Mom and Dad in trouble?" I hesitated, unsure how much Daniel had shared with his children. "They made some poor choices, Emma. There are consequences for those choices, but they're not going to jail, if that's what you're worried about." She was quiet for a moment. "Lucas doesn't really understand. He just knows everyone's upset. But I get it, I think. They took your money and your house." The simplicity of her understanding struck me. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Something like that, I acknowledged. But the important thing is that I'll be back in my own home soon, and you and Lucas can visit anytime you want. Dad says we have to sell our house, that we can't afford it anymore. This was news to me. The judge hadn't ordered them to sell. She had merely restructured the mortgage payments with oversight. Did he say why? Mom's real estate business isn't doing well, and Dad lost some big clients. Plus, they have to pay back all the money they took from you. She whispered the last part, as if saying it aloud made it more shamefully real. I see. And I did. Without the influx of my assets, without the ability to continue siphoning funds from my accounts, Daniel and Rebecca couldn't maintain their over-leveraged lifestyle. The house in Lakeside Estates had always been beyond their means. That's why they'd needed my help to purchase it in the first place. Are you mad at us too? Emma asked suddenly, her voice small. At you? Oh, Emma, no, never. None of this is your fault or Lucas's. I love you both so much, and that will never change, no matter what happens between me and your parents. After reassuring her further and promising to call again soon, I ended the conversation with a heavy heart. The consequences of Daniel and Rebecca's actions were already rippling outward, affecting their children in ways they perhaps hadn't fully anticipated. The next week passed in a blur of legal and practical activities. Natalie worked tirelessly to expedite the property transfer, engaging with the county recorder's office daily. Thomas helped me set up online banking access and secure new credit cards to replace those Daniel had compromised. Dr. Chen performed a comprehensive checkup, documenting my excellent health for the record. Throughout this period, I heard nothing directly from Daniel or Rebecca, though Natalie received the required financial accounting from their attorney. The document detailed every transfer, every withdrawal, every financial maneuver they had, executed using my compromised accounts, a comprehensive record of betrayal laid out in spreadsheet form. The total amount they had taken, excluding the house sale, was $328,472. 19. 8 days after the hearing, Natalie called with news that the property transfer was complete. My house was officially mine again. We scheduled the return for the following morning, allowing time for the utilities to be reconnected and basic cleaning to be arranged. That night, I sat in Thomas's garden, watching twilight settle over Portland's western hills. Tomorrow I would go home, back to the house where Robert and I had built our life together, where I had raised Daniel, where I had planned to live out my days in peace and independence. Yet the homecoming I had fought so hard for was tinged with melancholy. My house would be the same, but everything else had changed. My relationship with my son was fractured, possibly beyond repair. My grandchildren's lives were being upended as their parents faced financial reckoning. Even my own sense of security, of trust in family bonds, had been fundamentally altered. Thomas joined me, offering a cup of tea. Big day tomorrow. I accepted the tea gratefully. Indeed. You don't seem as happy as I expected. Winning doesn't always feel like winning, I observed. Sometimes it just feels like surviving. He nodded thoughtfully. Survival is underrated in my experience. It's the prerequisite for everything else, including healing, eventually. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the universe were welcoming me home with perfect weather. Thomas drove me to Cedar Heights, the familiar route bringing a surge of emotion as we turned onto my street. My house looked largely the same externally. The colonial facade with its wraparound porch, the mature landscaping Robert and I had, nurtured over decades. Only the garden showed signs of neglect, the flower beds overgrown, the rose bushes unpruned. Natalie met us at the front door, keys in hand. Welcome home, Martha. Stepping across the threshold felt momentous, a reclaiming of space, of history, of identity. The interior had been cleaned but was strangely bare. Many of my possessions were missing, either taken by Daniel and Rebecca or placed in storage. "Most of your furniture and personal items should be in the storage unit Daniel rented," Natalie explained, handing me documentation. "We can arrange for everything to be returned this week." I moved through the empty rooms, reacquainting myself with their dimensions, their light patterns, their memories. In the kitchen, I trailed my fingers along the countertop where I had taught Daniel to bake cookies as a child. In the dining room, I gazed at the wall where family photos had once hung. In the master bedroom, I stood by the window where Robert and I had watched countless sunsets together. Despite the emptiness, despite the missing belongings, it was unquestionably home. My home, reclaimed through courage, persistence, and the unwavering support of friends who had become as important as family. Thomas brought in the suitcase containing my clothes and toiletries from his guest room. "It's not much, but it's a start. We'll get the rest of your things back soon." I hugged him impulsively. "Thank you for everything." He returned the embrace awkwardly, then stepped back with a smile. "That's what friends do, Martha. They show up." After Thomas and Natalie left, promising to return later with groceries and other essentials, I found myself alone in my house for the first time in months. The silence was profound, broken only by the familiar creaks and settles of the old structure. I made my way to the back porch, settling into the single wicker chair that remained there. The garden beckoned, neglected but resilient, much like myself. Tomorrow I would begin reclaiming that too, pulling weeds, pruning overgrowth, nurturing what had managed to survive the abandonment. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from Daniel, the first direct communication since the courthouse. "The movers will deliver your stored belongings tomorrow at 10 a.m. Is that acceptable?" No apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Just a logistical question, as if we were distant acquaintances coordinating a routine delivery. I typed back, "Yes, thank you." Brief, neutral, neither hostile nor warm. It was all I could manage at this point. The path to forgiveness, if such a path existed, would be long and uncertain. For now, civil communication about practical matters would have to suffice. As afternoon faded toward evening, I sat on my porch watching the neighborhood come alive with after-work activities. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalk, couples walked dogs, someone fired up a barbecue, the scent of grilling meat wafting on the gentle breeze. Normal life continuing all around me, while I sat at the epicenter of a family earthquake whose aftershocks would reverberate for years to come. Tomorrow would bring the return of my possessions, the gradual refilling of empty rooms. The day after would bring more steps toward rebuilding my interrupted life, reconnecting with neighbors, reinstating routines, replanting my garden. And someday, perhaps, it would bring reconciliation. Not forgetting, not pretending the betrayal had never occurred, but finding a way forward that honored truth while allowing for growth and change. For now, though, I was home. Back in the house that held my history, my memories, my sense of self. They had forced me into a nursing home, attempting to erase my autonomy and access my assets. But I had fought back, revealing the mortgage I held as the ultimate leverage in a battle I had never wanted, but could not afford to lose. As twilight settled over Cedar Heights, I offered a silent toast to Robert, whose financial foresight had provided the very tool that ultimately protected me. I thought he would have appreciated the irony, that the mortgage created to help our son had become the instrument that saved me from his betrayal. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions, its own steps toward whatever new normal awaited me. But tonight, I would sleep in my own bed, in my own home, secure in the knowledge that I had not only survived but prevailed. Martha Reynolds, former bank executive, widow, grandmother, gardener, and now warrior, was home. At last. 6 months had passed since I'd reclaimed my home and my independence. The seasons had changed, summer giving way to autumn's fiery display. My garden had flourished under renewed care. The rose bushes pruned and thriving again, vegetable beds yielding their final harvest before winter's approach. Sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by morning sunlight filtering through lace curtains, I reviewed the latest mortgage statement from the independent trustee overseeing Daniel and Rebecca's payments. For the 6th consecutive month, the payment had arrived on time, neither early nor late, precisely according to the terms set by Judge Blackwell. Life had settled into new rhythms, distinct from before, but comfortable in their own way. My house felt like mine again, though some treasured belongings had never been recovered. Small items easy to overlook in the inventory, but significant in their absence. Robert's collection of vintage cufflinks, my grandmother's hand-embroidered handkerchiefs, the first Mother's Day card Daniel had made for me in kindergarten. Perhaps these items were simply lost in the chaos of moving. Or perhaps they had been deliberately kept, small retributions for my legal victory. I chose not to pursue them, understanding that some losses were simply part of the cost of this family fracture. The chime of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Through the window, I spotted Emma shifting nervously on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder. I opened the door with a welcoming smile. "Right on time," I greeted her, stepping aside to let her in. "Did your mother drop you off?" Emma nodded, setting her backpack on the entryway bench. "She has an open house in West Hills. She'll pick me up at 5. These Saturday visits had begun 3 months ago, tentative at first, arranged through terse text messages between Rebecca and me, always with precise drop-off and pickup times specified. Initially, Rebecca had waited in the car until Emma was safely inside my door. Now she merely watched from the driver's seat before pulling away. It was progress of a sort. "I brought my history project to work on," Emma explained, pulling textbooks and notebooks from her backpack. "It's about women in banking during the 1970s and 80s. I thought maybe you could help." I smiled, recognizing this for what it was, not just a school assignment but a bridge, a way for Emma to understand my life before I was simply grandma. Before the court case, before the nursing home, when I was Martha Reynolds, banking executive, breaking glass ceilings in an industry dominated by men. "I'd love to help," I said, leading her to the dining room table I'd cleared for this purpose. "Let me make us some tea first." As the kettle heated, I watched Emma arrange her materials with the methodical focus of a 14-year-old, taking a school project seriously. She had grown taller in recent months, her features maturing subtly toward the young woman she would become. The family turmoil had accelerated her transition from child to teenager, adding a layer of gravity to her expression that sometimes broke my heart to see. "How's the new house?" I asked casually, placing mugs of tea before us. "It's okay. Smaller, but my room has a window seat, which is cool." Emma shrugged, trying to sound indifferent, though I detected a note of lingering adjustment. "Lucas hates that we don't have a game room anymore." Daniel and Rebecca had indeed sold their Lakeside Estates home, moving to a modest townhouse in a good school district, but without the luxury amenities of their previous residence. The financial restructuring ordered by the court, combined with the repayment of my funds, had necessitated significant downsizing. "And your parents? How are they doing?" Emma studied her notebook, avoiding my eyes. "Dad's working a lot. Mom, too. They don't fight as much anymore." The implied "as much" hung between us, an acknowledgement that conflict had been a constant in their household since the court case. "That's good to hear," I said gently, not pressing further. These glimpses into their lives came only through Emma, and I was careful not to probe too deeply, not wanting to put her in the middle any more than she already was. We spent the next 2 hours on her project, my memories of workplace discrimination, creative financial workarounds, and gradual institutional change flowing more easily than I'd expected. Emma recorded everything diligently, asking insightful questions that revealed her growing understanding of systemic barriers and how they're overcome. Around noon, we took a break to prepare lunch together. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food for a crisp autumn day. As we ate, Emma's phone chimed with a text message. "It's Dad," she said, glancing at the screen. "He wants to know if he can drop Lucas off too. He got called into work for an emergency client meeting." I hesitated only briefly. "Of course. Lucas is always welcome." Emma typed a response, then looked up with a tentative smile. "He says he'll bring him in about 20 minutes, if that's okay." This would be the first time Daniel had come to my house since the court case. Previously, Rebecca had handled all drop-offs and pickups, maintaining the buffer of distance between us. My heart raced slightly at the prospect of seeing my son, face to face in this setting, my reclaimed home, the site of so many shared memories before everything fell apart. "That's fine," I assured Emma, working to keep my voice casual despite the sudden tension coiling in my chest. "We have plenty of soup and sandwich fixings for Lucas, too." The remaining 20 minutes passed both too quickly and too slowly. Emma returned to her project notes while I straightened up unnecessarily, washed dishes that were already clean, adjusted cushions on the sofa, small, nervous movements to occupy my hands while my mind raced through potential scenarios for this unexpected encounter. When the doorbell rang, I took a steadying breath before answering. Daniel stood on the porch, Lucas fidgeting beside him, a gaming tablet clutched in his small hands. My son looked thinner than when I'd last seen him in court, new lines etched around his eyes. The expensive watch he'd once worn was gone, replaced by a simpler timepiece. His tailored shirts had given way to more modest attire. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, the familiar address sounding strange after months of formal communications through attorneys and text messages. "Daniel," I acknowledged, then smiled warmly at Lucas. "Hello, sweetheart. Emma and I just had lunch. But there's plenty more if you're hungry." Lucas nodded enthusiastically, slipping past me into the house with the unself-conscious ease of a 10-year-old. "Do you still have those chocolate cookies in the jar?" He called over his shoulder, already heading toward the kitchen. His simple question, referencing a tradition from before, a continuity despite everything, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. "Check the blue canister," I called after him. Left alone with Daniel on the porch, an awkward silence settled between us. He shifted his weight, glancing past me into the house without quite meeting my eyes. "Thank you for taking them both on short notice," he said finally. "The Thompson account is in crisis mode, and I'm the only one who can handle it." "It's never short notice for my grandchildren," I replied. "They're always welcome here. Both of them." Daniel nodded, his gaze finally meeting mine. Something unspoken passed between us, not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but perhaps acknowledgement. Recognition of damage done, and the long, uncertain path toward whatever might come next. "They miss you," he said abruptly. "More than they let on, usually." "I miss them too," I responded, the simple truth of it sharp and clear between us. "And I miss who we used to be as a family." His expression tightened, pain flickering across features so similar to Robert's that it sometimes hurt to look at him directly. "Mom, he began, then stopped, seemingly unable to find words adequate to bridge the chasm between us. "It's okay," I said, not because it was, but because this tentative moment of connection was too fragile to bear the weight of everything that needed to be said. "You should go handle your client emergency. The children will be fine here until Rebecca picks them up at 5. Relief and something like gratitude crossed his face. "I'll text her to let her know Lucas is here too." He turned to go, then paused, looking back. "The garden looks good, like it used to." "It's getting there," I agreed. "Some things take time to recover properly." The double meaning wasn't lost on him. He nodded once more before walking back to his car. a practical sedan that had replaced the luxury SUV of before. I watched him drive away, my emotions too complex to name. Inside, I found Lucas happily munching cookies at the kitchen counter, while Emma continued her project at the dining table. The sight of my grandchildren in my home again, engaged in ordinary activities as if the world hadn't fractured and reformed around us, filled me with bittersweet joy. We spent the afternoon together, Lucas alternating between his games and helping me assess which autumn plants needed protection from the coming frost, Emma completing her project with careful attention to detail. The hours passed in comfortable domesticity, a pocket of normalcy in the still strange landscape of our fractured family. When Rebecca arrived at 5, I invited her in rather than having the children gather their belongings and meet her at the car. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted stepping into my home with visible discomfort. "The place looks nice," she offered awkwardly, glancing around at the rooms she had once hoped to claim through deception. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Emma's completed most of her history project. She's done excellent work." Rebecca nodded, watching as the children gathered their things. "Daniel told me he stopped by earlier. That was unexpected." "For both of us," I acknowledged. "But it went fine. The children seemed to enjoy being here." A complex emotion crossed her face. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. "They always did love coming to your house, even before." She trailed off, unwilling or unable to directly reference what had happened. "They can come more often if they'd like," I offered. "My door is always open to them." It was an olive branch of sorts, extended not for Rebecca's benefit, but for Emma and Lucas. For the possibility of healing, however partial, however slow. "I'll discuss it with Daniel," she said, neither accepting nor rejecting outright. "Come on, kids. Time to go." After they left, the house felt suddenly empty, echoing with the memory of young voices and activity. I moved through the rooms, straightening cushions, gathering dishes, returning to solitude more acute for having been briefly interrupted. That evening, as dusk settled over Cedar Heights, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching lights come on in neighboring homes. My phone chimed with a text message, Daniel, thanking me for taking Lucas on short notice and asking if a regular Saturday visit for both children might be possible going forward. I replied with a simple, "Yes, I'd like that very much," refusing to overanalyze his motivations or expectations. Whether this was the beginning of tentative reconciliation or merely practical coexistence for the children's benefit remained to be seen. Time would reveal which path we were on. As autumn deepened toward winter, I continued rebuilding my life piece by piece. I rejoined the community garden where I'd first sought help during my time at Pine Grove. I attended concerts at the Portland Symphony, sometimes with Thomas, who had become a valued friend. I volunteered at the public library, leading financial literacy workshops for seniors based on my banking expertise. The monthly mortgage statements continued to arrive, each one documenting on-time payments from Daniel and Rebecca. The court-ordered oversight would continue for another 18 months, but I had begun to trust that the financial aspects of our arrangement, at least, had stabilized. Emotional healing proved more complex, as it always does. There were good days, watching Emma's history presentation at school, helping Lucas build a science project, receiving a holiday card signed by all 4 of them. There were harder days, Robert's birthday. When memories of family celebrations made the current distance feel unbearable, the anniversary of my placement at Pine Grove, when anger resurfaced unexpectedly sharp and fresh. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the landscape of our relationship began to shift. Daniel occasionally stayed for a few minutes during drop-offs, making cautious conversation about neutral topics. Rebecca mentioned a book she thought I might enjoy, then actually brought it on her next visit. Small gestures, tentative olive branches, testing whether trust might someday be rebuilt. I accepted these offerings for what they were, not erasure of what had happened, not pretense that the betrayal hadn't cut bone deep, but acknowledgement that family relationships, even badly damaged ones, sometimes find ways to heal if given enough time, space, and honest effort. 1 year to the day after Judge Blackwell's ruling, I received an unexpected letter in the mail, handwritten on stationery I recognized as Daniel's. Inside was not the apology I had once thought essential, but something perhaps more valuable. An honest accounting of his actions, his regrets, and his hopes for our future as a family. Not justifications or excuses, but accountability, recognition of harm done, commitment to do better. It wasn't everything, but it was something, a foundation upon which other conversations might eventually be built. I placed the letter in my desk drawer, not yet ready to respond, but appreciating its significance as a step, however small, toward whatever new version of family we might eventually create. That evening, I attended a gathering at the community garden where I now tended a thriving plot of vegetables and flowers. Among the fellow gardeners were others who had experienced family estrangements, financial exploitation, late-life reinventions. We shared stories over potluck dishes, offering each other the validation and understanding that comes only from those who have walked similar paths. To resilience, Thomas toasted, raising his glass of cider, and to second acts. Second acts. Indeed, at 73, I was not who I had been at 72. Harder in some ways, softer in others. Less trusting, perhaps, but more discerning about where to place the trust I still extended. Less willing to sacrifice my own security for others. Comfort, more confident in my right to protect what was mine. They had forced me into a nursing home, believing my age made me disposable, my voice easily silenced, my assets available for the taking. They had not anticipated that the very mortgage I provided out of maternal generosity would become the leverage that saved me. They had underestimated the resilience of a woman who had spent decades overcoming barriers and breaking glass ceilings. Their miscalculation had cost them much, financially, emotionally, relationally. Whether it had taught them anything remained to be seen. Whether our family could ever fully heal was still an open question, one that only time would answer. But this much was certain. I was home, in control of my life and finances, surrounded by a community of my choosing, engaged in activities that brought me joy and purpose. I was not merely surviving the aftermath of betrayal, I was thriving despite it. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.